So good day everyone, I am Crystal J. Casayas and I will be reporting Module 7, Lumad Responses to Spanish Occupation. So the objectives are: what were the initial responses of the Lumads when they saw the Spaniards? What were some of the methods used by the Spaniards to subjugate the Lumads? And how did the Lumads respond to the methods mentioned above? So Agoncillo points out that writing an accurate history of the Filipino people under Spanish rule is extremely difficult. Because the Spanish colonial government had full control in creating, preserving, and of course in disseminating historical records. And as a result, the perspective and experiences of the Filipinos were excluded and the Spanish colonial government's narrative were promoted and preserved. The African proverb echoes the same idea. It symbolizes how the oppressors or the hunters dominate historical accounts, glorifying their actions, while the victims or oppressed, or what he so-called lions, are denied the chance to tell their side of the story. Scott and Constantino acknowledge the Spanish colonial bias in the historical records, but it can still reveal important information about how Filipinos reacted to colonization, including Lumads. Because history written by the powerful may expose the conditions and experiences of the oppressed unintentionally. And for the Lumads, their oral epics such as Ulahingan and Tulilangan serve as living history that they pass down through generations. Greg Hontiveros in Butuan of a Thousand Years described initial reaction of Lumads and early Filipinos are characterized by hospitality, curiosity, and the willingness to accommodate the Spaniards. For example, during Magellan's expedition, he was approached cautiously by local natives using buloto or canoes, and somehow responded positively to Magellan's gift. After initial contact, the local dato approached the Spaniard aboard a larger balanghay and brought golds and luya as their traditional offerings and a symbol of goodwill and respect. He also offered goods like rice and fish, and the Spaniards were invited to share a feast with wine or liquor. This shows Filipino hospitality and communal values. However, Agoncillo pointed out that the genuine hospitality of the Filipinos shown to the Spaniards was misunderstood. The Spaniards assumed that it was a sign of inferiority or submission, in short, weakness. This misinterpretation fueled the Spaniards' belief that the natives, including the Lumads, would be easy to dominate and control. The phrase God, Gold, and Glory was believed to summarize Spain's colonization motives, but Kashmir and Scott argued that economic motives were the true driving force. Colonization was primarily about securing trade routes and resources which affected the Lumads, even though they weren't the target. And it's because of territorial exploitation. Because the Spaniards want to control the lands and resources, they reached Lumad territories, especially in Mindanao, which led to conflict over ancestral lands. It's also because of the disruption of trade and livelihood. It disrupted traditional Lumad trade networks and resource access. Now, Rodolfo Rodel pointed out that Magellan's instruction had no mention of spreading Christianity, because the popular narrative is what we were colonized for, holy motives to save souls. And Manuel Tawagon joked that the Spanish mission assumed everybody was going to hell. But in reality, they were aggressors and colonizers seeking to exploit the archipelago's resources. Spanish colonization relied on divide and rule tactics, not just military force or missionary efforts. They exploited existing rivalries among native groups. For example, the Karagans of Surigao, they were recruited to fight against other groups like Moros. And another effective tactic was befriending local chiefs. So Spanish colonial control relied on civil-military governance, encomienda systems or land grants for tribute and labors, church authorities or religious and cultural control, and this is to impose their influence. However, in Mindanao, the situation was more complex. Spanish influence was limited by the rise of Muslim sultanates resisting colonization, and the shift of the colonial capital to Manila, reducing focus on the south. Spain used the encomienda system to reduce governance costs. Encomenderos, or the Spanish officers, collected tribute from natives and in exchange they promised protection, justice, and religious instruction. And because of the relief, the locals' power was placed in the hands of the Spanish officers, and it often led to abuses and exploitation of native communities, including the Lumans. In conclusion to that, the encomienda was a tool for an economic extraction and social control. But persistent criticisms and abuses led to abolition of the encomienda system. But despite its end, other forms of forced labor and tribute persisted in colonial governance. And that would be all for my report.